What is up, party people? We are back today with Animal Form and Function Part 5, Respiratory and Cardiovascular Systems. Go ahead and pause for our objectives. We're going to start off with our respiratory system. So the most vital part is oxygen, because it's the most important molecule that's needed by animals, because nearly all animals require O2 for all of their processes. There are various mechanisms used among animals. The most common could be diffusion, and we see this a lot in simple animals like flatworms, and they obtain oxygen through the direct diffusion with their environment. Every cell is in close contact with the external environment, and again, we see this in flat-bodied forms. Take a look at the photo on the right to see just how flat our flatworm friend is. Skin. Some animals have networks of capillaries just below the skin surface, and the skin serves as the primary gas exchange barrier. We see this in earthworms or amphibians. Gills are highly branched, thin filaments where oxygen diffuses into the bloodstream from the water. This is mostly aquatic animals that use the gill system, and their branch systems help increase surface area, which means water is less saturated than air. Next is the tracheal system, which is a network of small tubes that carry the oxygen to the different parts of the body. It does not involve a circulatory system. It does involve direct and efficient oxygen delivery. There are also spiracles, which are direct openings along the body that connect to the tracheal systems, and this is primarily used by insects. Lungs are the spongy organs responsible for breathing and gas exchange. This is mainly used by animals and mammals, like humans. Some animals use more than one mechanism, like arachnids. They have a tracheal system combined with book lungs. Amphibians use gills as the tadpole stage, and diffusion through the skin combined with lungs as adults. Birds use lungs and an air sac system to increase their oxygen to meet significantly higher needs compared to mammals, at least. But what is the respiratory anatomy? We're going to focus on humans because, well, we're human, and why not learn about us? The primary part of the respiratory system is going to be the first step, which is the nasal cavity. It's located inside the nose where the air enters the respiratory system, and it's humidified and warmed to the body's temperature. Air can also enter through the oral cavity if the nasal cavity is blocked or increased airflow is needed. But typically the nasal cavity is what we rely on, unless you're sick and your nose is stuffy, and then in that case you become a mouth breather for a little bit. Your pharynx is the membrane-lined cavity behind the nasal and oral cavities that connects to the esophagus or throat. The larynx is the hollow muscular organ that forms the air passageway to the lungs and houses the vocal cord or vocal box or voice box. The epiglottis is the flap that covers the trachea during swallowing to prevent food or liquids from entering the respiratory system. However, it doesn't always work. So sometimes if something goes down the wrong tube, it's because your epiglottis failed to do its job, and then you have to cough it up. The trachea is the hollow tube, or airway, made of incomplete rings of hyaline cartilage and smooth muscle. It helps connect the pharynx to the bronchi of the lungs. It's lined with goblet cells that produce mucus, and smooth muscle controlled by the nervous and reflex systems. Coughing, which is what I just mentioned when your epiglottis doesn't do its job. Your bronchi, it's the smaller airway passages of the lungs. So you have the primary bronchi, which branch from the trachea, and then smaller to the secondary, tertiary, and bronchioles. Respiratory bronchioles are tiny in diameter. There's no cartilage, and they rely on inhaled air to maintain their shape. Alveolar ducts. These are the small passageways connecting to the respiratory bronchioles to the alveolar sacs. The alveolar sacs are the clusters of alveoli, which are the tiny air sacs where gas exchange occurs. The lungs are the primary organ that is responsible for the air intake and expulsion, as well as gas exchange, and this contains the bronchi, bronchioles, alveoli, and capillaries. It's divided into the left and right lungs. The right lung contains an upper, superior, middle, and lower inferior lobes. So remember, superior being higher or taller, inferior, lower, or shorter. And then the left lung contains a superior and an inferior lobe, and I hope you know this by now, but the reason is because our heart is not directly center. It actually is shifted slightly, which you'll see in the photo in the bottom right-hand corner, is why there seems to be a chunk taken out of the left lung. Well, in reality, that's just where the heart sits. Go ahead and pause here to take a closer look. While it's not technically part of the respiratory system, skeletal muscles also play a pivotal role of the systems because they're responsible for the mechanical processes that are involved in breathing or ventilation. The diaphragm is the large dome-shaped muscle located below the lungs at the end of the thoracic cavity. It's the primary muscle for respiration, especially for involuntary rhythmic respiration. Our intercostal muscles are also important because they help expand or contract the ribcage to aid in inhalation and exhalation. External intercostals help inhale. Internal intercostals help exhale. Our protective mechanisms are necessary to keep particles like dust, dirt, bacteria, and other foreign microbes from entering our body through the respiratory system. So our nasal cavity is our first line of defense because it contains the hair and mucus, which trap foreign particles. Mucus is the sticky substance produced by goblet cells made of mucin, salts, and water. The cilia are the hair-like projections that line the trachea, bronchi, and bronchioles, which then beat together to move the mucus and trap particles out of the lung. So if you're really sick and you have the croup or excess mucus, this is because all of those nasty little particles have been trapped in the mucus, which means it's working, and then you might have to cough or sneeze to excrete all of those bad particles. Gas exchange is also important. Gas moves in a similar manner to a concentration gradient, but it's based on their pressure gradient, partial pressure. Partial pressure. Keep that in mind. PP, partial pressure. It's the portion of total air pressure associated with a single gas. For all of my math and super duper smart folks, feel free to go ahead and read the bullet points under partial pressure. To me, it doesn't make much sense, but it might to you. We don't need to know that for this upcoming test, though. Gas exchange occurs due to the movement of individual gases and the continuous downhill movement based on the differences in partial pressure. Now, for my chem folks, you definitely know this one, Boyle's law. It's a gas law, and it states that in a closed space, volume and pressure have an inverse relationship. Increased volume means decreased pressure and vice versa. It's the mechanical act of breathing, which then manipulates the partial pressure, changing the pressure gradients and ensuring the correct directional movement of the oxygen and CO2. Our breathing process, especially for mammals, humans, overall, it's ventilation, which is breathing. It's the movement of air to and from the atmosphere and the lungs, resulting in the changes in pressure gradients facilitated by the respiratory muscles. Inspiration, or inhalation, is where the diaphragm and external intercostal muscles contract, which expands the thoracic cavity, increasing the volume of the lungs, reducing the air pressure, and drawing in atmospheric air. Expiration, or exhalation, is where the diaphragm and external intercostals relax, the thoracic cavity returns to normal, or recoils, reducing the volume of the lungs, increasing air pressure, which then forces air out of the atmosphere. Take a look to the photo on the right. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are both transported in blood, but through different ways. Oxygen, only 1.5% is actually dissolved directly in blood. The other 98.5% binds to hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the protein found in red blood cells, and it contains 4 iron atoms, which then bind, making 4 oxygen atoms, and the binding is reversible, but again, it's influenced by partial pressure. Carbon dioxide, on the other hand, the majority, meaning 70%, is converted into bicarbonate and hydrogen, which helps maintain the pH. 23% bind to hemoglobin and 7% dissolve in blood. The dissolved oxygen and carbon dioxide help create the partial pressure needed to facilitate the gas exchange. Feel free to take a photo or take a look at this photo for a closer look. The process of gas exchange is continuous, and it involves the coordinated efforts of the respiratory and cardiovascular systems. The circulatory system is divided into 2 circuits. The pulmonary circuit pumps the carbon dioxide-rich and O2 poor blood from the right ventricle of the heart to the lungs, where the carbon dioxide is offloaded, the oxygen is loaded, and it returns to the left atrium of the heart. The other is our systemic circuit. This is where the oxygen-rich blood is pumped to the tissues of the body where it's offloaded, CO2 is onloaded as well as the waste, and then the blood is pumped from the left ventricle of the heart and returned to the right atrium. Now, we've talked a lot about the respiratory system, but we were also just talking about blood. So what is the anatomy of the heart, though? Well, we have, again, our superior and inferior. Remember, superior is above, inferior is below. Our superior vena cava transports the O2 poor blood from the brain and upper extremities. Our inferior vena cava transports the O2 poor blood from the lower body. Our right atrium receives the O2 poor blood from the superior and inferior vena cavas and the coronary sinus, which drains from the heart itself. Our right ventricle receives blood from the right atrium and pushes it into the pulmonary artery for the transport of the lungs. The pulmonary vein transports the oxygen-rich blood from the lungs. Our left atrium receives the blood from the pulmonary vein. Our left ventricle receives blood from the left atrium and pushes it into the aorta. The aorta is the major artery of blood transporting O2-rich blood to the secondary arteries, which then are transported throughout the body. That is a lot. Please take a look at this photo on the right as I continue to explain. Valves. Valves are thin, flexible flaps that separate the sections of the heart and prevent backflow of blood in between contractions. We have the atrioventricular valves, which consists of the tricuspid valve, which separate the right atrium and right ventricle, and then the mitral valve, which separates the left atrium and left ventricle. Then we have our semilunar valves. We have the pulmonary valve, which separates the right ventricle and pulmonary artery. This is the only valve with 2 flaps instead of 3. And then the aortic valve, which separates the left ventricle and the aorta. Now, the cycle. Our cardiac cycle is the coordinated filling and emptying of the heart, which pumps blood throughout the system. It results from the electrical signals causing a rhythmic cycle of contractions and relaxations of the heart. There are more than 100,000 cycles per day, which is crazy. You have your systole, which is the heart contraction, pushing blood out of the heart, and your diastole, which is the heart relaxing and the blood flowing into the heart. Your heartbeat is actually the lub-dub, and the lub-dub is the sound associated with the opening and closing of valves. The lub is when the atria contracts at the same time, forcing blood through the atrioventricular valves. The dub is where the ventricles contract, forcing blood into the aorta and pulmonary artery through these semilunar valves. Our cardiac cycle is triggered with the electrical signals from the synostoral node, which serves as the heart's pacemaker, and it does not require signals from the brain because, well, we'd probably be dead if we had to signal from our brain to our heart every single time, especially if there's over 100,000 each day. Either way, contractions of both the atria occur simultaneously. The signal travels from the SA node to the atrioventricular node with a slight delay, so teeny tiny that humans can't even know. And then it travels down through the structures which end at the apex of the heart, and then up to the ventricles, triggering their contraction. Our cardiomyocytes are the muscle cells of the heart connected by the intercalated discs, which allow for the immediate transmission of the electrical signal from cell to cell, ensuring the coordinated contraction. Feel free to take a photo or take a look at the photo on the right. Our electrocardiogram, or an ECG, is just the written record of the electrical impulses of our cardiac muscles, but some might also call this your heartbeat. Our arteries are the blood vessels that support blood away from the heart. We're transporting blood away. The main artery is the aorta, which then branches into several major arteries: the carotid, which is the head and brain, the brachial or subclavian to arms, thoracic or abdominal, which is your thoracic organs, and then your iliac or femoral, which are your legs and pelvis. The major arteries branch into smaller arterioles, which then go deeper into muscle and organs. Arterioles branch into capillary beds, which contain many smaller vessels called capillaries. Capillaries are where the gas, nutrients, and waste exchange occur. Veins are the blood vessels that transport blood towards the heart. They're the opposite of arteries. And venules are where the capillaries converge and transition to blood transport towards the heart. Our circulatory system, blood flow regulation, is vital in numerous physiological and metabolic processes. Your heart rate is the number of heartbeats, the contractions and relaxations per minute. It's increased or decreased based on the body's O2 requirements. So in exercise, you're going to need more, it should be increased. And at night, you should need significantly less, so it should be significantly lower to reflect that. The stroke volume is the volume of blood pushed out of the heart per contraction, and it can be increased through stronger contractions. Cardiac output is the total volume pumped by the heart per minute. So it's the heart rate times the heart volume, or the stroke volume. The capillary control. We have two kinds. We have vasoconstriction and vasodilation. Vasoconstriction, we're narrowing the blood vessels. We're slowing blood flow. This would be if you want to conserve heat. Vasodilation is where we're widening the blood vessels and increasing blood flow, as if you want to expel heat. Blood pressure is the pressure exerted by the blood on the walls of the blood vessels, which help move blood through the body. You have your systolic pressure, which is the pressure during a heart contraction. You want this around 120. Then you have your diastolic pressure, which is the pressure during the heart relaxation between contractions. You want this around 80. Your blood pressure can be impacted by stress, activity levels, hormone levels, blood flow regulation mechanisms, and or illness. But high blood pressure is not good for you. So if it's above 120 or 180, around anywhere, let's say 129, that's elevated. If we're getting past 129 into the 130s and 140s over 90 or even higher than that, you have high blood pressure. And if you're higher than any of those and you're around 180 over 120, you need to go get checked out because something is significantly wrong. Blood pressure is so important, in fact, that many people are on medicines to help control it because any slight irregularity for a prolonged period of time could lead to death. Blood. We've talked about this so much, but what really is blood? Blood is the liquid that flows through blood vessels, which are made of plasma, blood cells, and platelets. Erythrocytes are red blood cells. These are the cells responsible for the transport of oxygen. The red color comes from the oxygen binding to the hemoglobin and iron. They're also formed from stem cells in red bone marrow. They don't contain a nuclei or mitochondria at maturity. And your blood type is determined by the presence or absence of antigens on the outer membrane of your RBCs. So your AB, and O blood types. Your RH system is based on the presence or absence of the renus antigen. This gives you your negative or positive, A negative, B negative, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, you have your leukocytes. These are our white blood cells, or our best friends, because they're the blood cells involved in the body's immune system. And there are several types that have varying roles, but overall, they help fight off the bad guys. Our platelets are cell fragments that form in bone marrow, and they're involved in the clotting and prevention of excess bleeding. So these are the first people to the scene of a cut or a small boo-boo, and they help form scabs so that they stop the bleeding. And then plasma. Plasma is the liquid portion of blood, which is made of water, proteins, lipids, glucose, electrolytes, and clotting factors. And then serum is just plasma without clotting factors. Now, what types of circulatory systems can we have? We talked about respiratory systems, but what about circulatory systems? Well, you can have an open system, meaning blood is not enclosed by blood vessels. It's pumped directly into the cavities, and this is known as a hemosol. We typically see these in arthropods, mollusks, or some other primitive chordates. The hemolymph is where blood is mixed with the interstitial fluids. Ostia is the opening in the heart where the hemolymph re-enters after circulating the body. And this lowers energy requirements because it's not as much energy. Whereas on the other hand, a closed system is where blood is enclosed by blood vessels and it's circulated in one direction throughout the body and back to the heart. We see this in vertebrates primarily, like humans. And this has a higher energy requirement because it's more work. You could also have no system. It's a very simple system, like Cnidaria, and they don't have a circulatory system, and they exchange materials through diffusion with their environment. Vertebrates have closed systems. So fish, they have two-chambered hearts, unidirectional flow through their gills and the body and back to the heart. Amphibians have a three-chambered heart, two circuits, one flows to the skin and lungs for oxygen loading, and one takes the oxygen-rich blood to the rest of the body. Reptiles have three-chambered hearts, two circuits, one flows to the lungs for oxygen loading, and one takes the oxygen-rich blood to the rest of the body. They also have ventricles, which partially separated, causing some mixing, or O2-rich and O2-poor blood. And then finally, our mammals and birds have four-chambered hearts with fully separated atriums and ventricles that keep the oxygen-rich and poor blood separated. And again, this has been our focus of the presentation. Feel free to pause and take a closer look at the different systems. So why are the respiratory and circulatory systems so vital? Well, they're so important because they both form a complex system where each is dependent on the other to function. Without the circulatory system, gas exchange could not occur between the atmosphere via the lungs and the tissues throughout the body. But without the respiratory system, the circulatory system cannot maintain the pH, and pH fluctuations occur because of the waste and other byproducts that enter and exit the blood. Our oxygen and CO2 also play a crucial role in the blood's ability to act as a chemical buffer. So essentially, their interdependence means if one doesn't work, the other doesn't work, and then that means they both don't work. And that, therefore, means you're dead. So you have to have them both working, and ideally, you want them working at their best capacity. So when you get sick, your body is having to fight that off because it's not at its peak performance. Feel free to pause and take a look at our objectives again. I hope you learned something from this video, and make sure to check out upcoming videos so that you can ace this next bio test.